Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The Neuro Diaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrego country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm your host Jade Rose and I'm here today with Sophie Hale from the Sophie Hale on Instagram. Hey Sophie.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good today, thank you. The kids were on half term last week, so they're back in today, so I feel like I've got a little bit of breathing space today. It's always nice to get back to your own space.
Yeah, definitely. Is half term, that's like their school holidays?
Yeah, so they have like an October half term, like the school holidays, and obviously for Christmas they'll break up, so they just have like a week in October, so yeah. Just quite full on. Nice to have them home, but very like full on.
I can imagine. I feel like that after just a weekend sometimes. Like today was Monday and I was like, thank God, like put them into daycare, like I can breathe for a minute.
You just can't catch up with anything, can you? You just need to have that like space to just, like you said, just catch. Like Monday for me is normally a day of just kind of catching up on the things that I didn't get to do at the weekend, because we were so busy. So yeah, it is nice to have my own space today, definitely.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, like it's not hard to look after your child, it's hard to do anything else while looking after your child.
I say this all the time. This is exactly what it is. I always say, I don't find that aspect of motherhood, like the nurturing and the caring and like loving your children, that comes very naturally, like to women. So I think that is absolutely like fine. It's managing everything else on top of that is so difficult, and that's what makes it so challenging. All of those expectations, I think, is what just makes it so challenging.
100%. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think you're so right. It's having to do like all of the housework and all of the life admin and all of the mental load while doing that. Like that's when it gets really overstimulating and really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Oh, good. How old are your kids?
5 and 3.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so we're definitely coming out of that. Yeah, we're coming out of that like really difficult, like, because we had 2 under 2, so it was intense for quite a few years. But now that my son's in school, it's definitely got a little bit easier, and we're kind of finding our feet, which is crazy because it's been 5 years. Like I became a mum 5 years ago, so you would think that before then it would get a little bit easier, but it just doesn't. It's just, I feel like every level there's a new challenge, and you, especially if you are neurodivergent, like there's all of those added challenges onto that as well. And yeah, it's just such a challenge every level you get to anyway. I think with motherhood there's always something to kind of worry about or navigate through, and it's an ongoing thing. It's never really like you feel confident one day. It's just an ongoing journey, I think.
Yeah, it's full on, isn't it? I'm the same as you, actually. We had 2 under 2, and my son will be 5 in January. My daughter just turned 3, so really similar ages as well. It's a sweet time, and I agree with you. It's sort of like we're just catching our breath, and my husband and I, we sort of say to each other like, oh, it's finally starting to pay off. Like having the 2 under 2, because it is so intense. But now we do have moments where they're like friends and they're entertaining each other, and we're like, it's okay.
That's when they're in that moment, you're like, oh, okay. Like everyone said to me, have them close together because they'll be best friends. They'll always have a friend to play with, and like blah blah blah. And when they're in that phase, it's so lovely because you are like, oh, this is why we did this. Like it really does pay off, like you said. But then when they fight, you just think, oh my goodness, why did we have them like so close together? Because they just bicker and bicker, and it feels like my head is going to fall off some days. I'm just like, I have no idea how to deal with this. Like, it's just so hard.
Yeah. We had like just a weekend, like one of those weekends, like my daughter, who's usually really funny and like that's her nature, she was in just like the whingiest mood on Saturday, just whinge about everything. And then on Sunday,
Yeah.
my son was just, he was
Yeah.
just in a bad mood. He was just angry and like, yeah, he was just raging at everything.
Yeah.
Thank God for Monday morning.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well,
Absolutely.
well, Sophie, thanks so much for joining us here today. I came across your profile on Instagram and I followed you for a little while. So I love the way you talk about your experience with ADHD and, getting that diagnosis later in life. And also something I really love about the way that you talk about it is the way that you try and manage it holistically and manage it through lifestyle. I also really love the aspect of like cycle syncing and using that to your, to your advantage. And I think as women, it's just something that we were never taught, we're so unaware of, and something that can have such an impact on our mental health. Or you could be the most mentally healthy person out there and this is still going to have an impact on you on a monthly basis because of the way it's spiking your hormones, and it's just never taught to anyone. So I love the way you incorporate all of that as a means to manage living with ADHD. I felt a lot of I'm living with bipolar, and I find a lot of similarities between that because for me, like lifestyle management is necessary. It's 100% like essential to my well-being. Having, a disciplined lifestyle with, exercise, eating, routines, like mindfulness as well is so essential for like my well-being and sort of avoiding episodes or, coming out of episodes, avoiding going into them. So I found that approach really refreshing. So yeah, thanks for putting that out into the world.
Yeah, well, thank you for following along. It was something that I think when I first got diagnosed, it wasn't necessarily, I had been on a wait list for like 18 months. So when I first got referred to the GP for an assessment, they kind of preempted that it was going to be 1 to 2 years wait list. And I was thinking, the way that I felt when I went to the GP initially to get the assessment, it was like I said, I had 2 kids under 2 and they were very young at that point, and I just didn't want to have to wait 2 years to get medication or, any type of support with ADHD. And I just thought, I just don't want to put my life on hold and kind of hold out for this assessment. And I didn't even know how I would react to medication, whether I was want to go on it and all of those things. And it's something that I've always really valued as holistic health. Like I've always kind of been interested in it and done qualifications in it, and just something that I have always kind of tried to incorporate into my life. So I wasn't sure how I felt about medication anyway. So I just started to put those practices in place, and cyclical living was one of the things that I kind of come across during that journey. And it just helped massively. Like, so when I finally got that diagnosis 18 months later, it was kind of like, it was a massive relief. But I felt like at that point I was already really managing my symptoms and stuff on a daily basis through things like cyclical living and lifestyle, that I didn't necessarily feel the need for medication at that point. I felt like I'd really got to a strong place in managing my needs and my mental health. And I think a lot of these things are just, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, actually are just, really simple but effective things, like you said, like movement and nutrition. And yes, we can make them kind of neurodivergent friendly and in a way that works with our brain. But I think a lot of those things are just always going to be beneficial to anyone and their mental health and whatever they're struggling with anyway.
Yeah, it's a really cool take on it. And I totally get how, like, where, because obviously things are getting quite escalated when you're at the point of like going to get a diagnosis. It's like generally because you're you're really noticing you're struggling. So I get how you'd be in that situation, and then being told you have to wait that long, and you're like, okay, well, how do I live with this now? What do I do now while I'm waiting for that? So yeah, that's really, it's kind of cool in a way that it took you on that journey. How did that happen for you, coming to that point, I guess, when you got the diagnosis? Was so you'd already had your children?
Yeah.
What led you to sort of go down that path?
Yeah, so it was funny really, because it was basically social media, which is, you can say what you want about social media, but I think the amount of information and research out there, it can be really, really helpful for people to find that online and in communities and things like that. So I just came across some ADHD content very kind of by chance. And I just found that I was like ticking off. It was a lot of kinds of content that was like, these are symptoms of women with ADHD. And I just felt like I was ticking off every single box. And it's never something that I had considered before, because I think the information isn't out there. The research isn't done. I don't think, research has been done on women with ADHD since, I think it only started in like 2017, 2018, something, very late on, like very recently, people have started researching ADHD and the effects on women. It was like I had that kind of, that understanding of ADHD as being very much in children, very much in boys, like very hyperactive. Like I think everyone kind of thinks of ADHD and thinks of that. So when I'm struggling with, severe emotional dysregulation and mood swings and brain fog and, negative self-talk and all of those types of things, ADHD would never be something that I would automatically go, oh yeah, like it must be ADHD. So I saw that content and was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like I'm resonating with all of this. And I started to do some research around it, and, the penny really dropped that this is something that I have been dealing with my whole life. I felt like I was different my whole life. I have 6 brothers and sisters. So even though I was around people all the time, and, we have a very, very healthy relationship and a loving family and all of those things, I always just kind of felt very alone in the way that I felt and the way I saw life and experienced things. And I can't really describe, up until that point, I couldn't describe how I felt different. But then when I started to see the content around ADHD, I was like, oh, maybe it is because I am different. And it kind of put into words what I'd been experiencing a lot of my life. So I think one day I must have had one of those days where I just kind of felt like it was all too much. And, at that point I had 2 kids under 2. My husband was like coming home and finding me on the floor, sobbing, like one child on the boob, one like running around doing whatever. And I was just like, oh, I couldn't function with the day-to-day things, like the really mundane, seemingly simple type of stuff, keeping on top of laundry and, meals and like all of like appointments. I was like forgetting the kids' doctor's appointments, and I just could not do like those really daily day-to-day things. And that just felt incredibly overwhelming, because I think as a mum, you always kind of question your abilities as a parent anyway. Like every single day, you're kind of like, am I doing enough? Like, am I a good mum? And so it just made me feel very incapable, and that really knocked my confidence. So I think one day I'd just seen all this content, had one of those really, really difficult days, and something in me just said, just ring the GP, like just ring the doctor and ask for help. And so I did, and I felt very scared doing it. But once I'd kind of relayed my symptoms, they were like, yeah, it definitely sounds like ADHD. We'll get you referred. And even them kind of just validating that and saying, yeah, like it does sound like that. I was like, oh, okay, like it's not something that I'm making up in my head. And so that's when then they referred me. I was on a wait list for about 18 months. And that's when I then went for the assessment, and he diagnosed me with ADHD, and he also did an autism screening, which I didn't realize they go hand in hand essentially. Like they do your ADHD assessment, and at the same time they'll do like an autism screening. And he said that I scored very highly on the autism like test, or like the spectrum. So he wanted to refer me for like an official assessment for autism as well, which that was a shock because that's not something that I'd ever considered before then. So that was a real shock. But again, that's kind of like, I think that wait list is 4 or 5 years, if not more, for adults. So yeah, so he's kind of put me on that pathway, but it's not something that I will, be getting anytime soon type of thing. So yeah, that's how I 18 months later got the diagnosis. So
Wow. Um,
yeah.
wow. I can only imagine like the validation that would come from, because I can picture it, right? Like I just picture that so viscerally because I've been there and been,
Yeah.
the mum on the floor just completely overwhelmed and just
Yeah.
feeling like I'm not coping, and then also just feeling like, because you get told, and I'm sure you would have been told this as well, that's just motherhood. And yeah, so for you
Yeah.
at 2 under 2, like of course it's hard, like you're gonna have hard days, but then like knowing like, no, there's more to this, like I'm not
Yeah.
coping, like so
Well,
it's really
actually,
good that you did that.
the first time that I went to the GP that I spoke to that time, they actually did say that. They said,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're just overwhelmed, like you've got two very young children, like I'm sure. I think they even like questioned if it was postpartum depression. And I've been diagnosed with depression when I was like 21, and this felt very different. And
Yeah.
so I kind of, but I was like so embarrassed that I thought that it was ADHD, and they kind of initially was like, it could be postpartum, like it's not that. Like they basically said what you said, you're an overwhelmed mom. And so I kind of put the phone down and was like, oh my goodness, I've worked myself up thinking it's something that it's not. But a few days later, I did my intuition was still saying,
Yeah.
call back and ask for another GP, like ask for a second opinion. And so I did, and that GP then was the one that was like, no, it definitely does sound like ADHD. So
Yeah.
I was able to get that, assessment through that. But the first one definitely did dismiss it as that.
Yeah. When you called up, and do you find that going through that experience, you sort of have to be very self-aware of your symptoms, be very articulate about your symptoms,
Yeah.
and also kind of have done your own research, like yourself ahead of time? Because I
Yeah.
find, in speaking to people, like you really have to be your own advocate going into any sort of healthcare system, because you don't know, like you go in with this idea of like, they're the doctor, they know everything about every illness, and they're going to tell me what's wrong with me or what's happening with me.
Yeah.
And it's really not like that. Like you don't know who you're getting and what their like exposure to, particularly something like ADHD in women, which as you said is so new researched, that doctors who got their degrees 25 years ago, they're not, necessarily up to date with this information themselves. So how did you prepare, and how did you go in and articulate to the doctor to actually get them to listen to you?
I think that I really didn't know what to expect. I think, again, there's not really a lot out there about the actual assessment when you go for it. There's not a lot of information about kind of the questions that they'll ask. And so I did not know what to expect. And I felt like I was going into an exam. And I was like, in my head, I was like, I have to pass this exam. I have to pass this exam. I've waited 18 months. So I did write down things because obviously I tend to forget a lot of things, and I didn't know what questions he was going to ask, but I definitely wanted to have information with me so that when they did ask those questions, I could kind of refer back to it. They also ask for like school reports. So I was lucky that my mum has kept all of them, so I was able to kind of go through them. And that was like a real interesting journey in itself, looking back on school reports now with this kind of new lens of, oh, I wasn't just shy or different or this or that. Like I just saw it through a completely different lens, like my experience as a child, and it made so much sense knowing what I knew then about ADHD. And I think kind of I was able to talk about my childhood a little bit more through that lens because I'd had that research and that information that I'd done. And yeah, I just made sure that I had plenty of notes. I keep a journal every single day, so it's kind of very easy for me to go back through my journal and be like, oh, okay, I experience, mood swings around this time in my cycle and this, and a lot of that. I think that like what you're talking about, the self-awareness and stuff, I'd been on a self-development journey for a very long time before this anyway. So I think that kind of what I referred to before, I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression when I was 21. I came out of a really toxic relationship and was just kind of in a black hole, like a really, really dark place. And it was then that kind of the doctor said to me, look, like we'll put you on antidepressants, but you're still very young. Like, I don't really want you to be on antidepressants your whole life. Like, I don't think it's healthy. Would you try a more holistic approach? So I think that's kind of what started my holistic journey as well, is I'm very grateful to that GP who wasn't just kind of like, we'll give you the medication to kind of get you out of this place, but I don't think it's something that is going to be sustainable for you, being so young and stuff. Like, he said, why don't you try, exercise? At this point, I was like, early 20s, just like going out every weekend and partying and whatever, and wasn't interested in going to the gym at all. But I was kind of desperate as well at this point. So he was like, try meditation and exercise. Like, he kind of gave me a list of things to explore. And so that's what I started doing and started putting those lifestyle things in place. And then I kind of went on a self-development journey and with spirituality, and I read The Secret and things like that. And I think that work that I'd done up until that point really helped with my ADHD kind of realization, because I think, like you said, I was aware of what was going on in my body, and I was aware of the experience that I was having. I was kind of like very connected to myself in that sense. So I think that definitely helped, that I had been on this self-discovery journey of like, oh, I know who I am, even with the ADHD.
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting. It's good that you have that level of awareness. And I'm keen to hear more about, looking back on your experience growing up and what that was like once you got this new information. But I just wanted to comment as well, when you said like you wrote everything down prior to going in. That's really good. And they say if you, like, for anyone listening, like if you're thinking about going for an assessment or you've got one booked in, what Sophie said is a really good way to approach it, because you get in there. And we did one recently. We did an autism and ADHD assessment for my son, I got to go in with my husband, so that there was two of us to remember things, and we sat down and we wrote things out and talked about everything beforehand, because part of it for the child one is like this 3-hour interview with the parents, and they have like a whole booklet of questions that they ask you questions about his development, and does he do this, or what about this behavior, or what about this thing, and you're trying to remember, and then you have to give examples, and sometimes they're looking for like very specific examples, and you're like, there's just so much, there's so many things to remember and think of, and especially for girls as well, because it can be so subtle or present so differently. It's really it's kind of necessary at the moment, while their healthcare system is kind of catching up in some ways to accounts of lived experience, and that research is just coming into play, to go in like prepared with this information. It
really did help. Like I said, I'm very forgetful, so I think that it was I think it's hard as well to kind of know where the ADHD begins and I end, if that makes any sense. Like, you're kind of like, I don't know, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not sure if this is ADHD specific. This is just what I experience, and this is just who I am. So I think I kind of was bearing that in mind as well, that I just kind of wrote down everything that I experienced. I wasn't kind of compartmentalizing it into saying, okay, and this is how I experience ADHD. It was just like, this is how I feel on a daily basis. These are the things that are really challenging for me, and I don't feel like that's normal. But obviously, they are more kind of qualified to tell me whether that's ADHD or whatever. So it did really help.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, let's go back to Sophie in school, and sort of, you've mentioned that you grew up with your as part of a large family, and you felt different. What were you like in school, and what are your memories of that experience?
So I remember being very shy. Like, when I started school, I was kind of like, found it hard to make friends. I found the playground like very overwhelming and very noisy. I have like very vivid memories of me walking around holding like the teacher's hand because I think I just didn't want to go out into the world. And I think, you know, being from a big family is really lovely because we all have each other and we're very close, and but you kind of live in this bubble of the safety of like, oh, this is like my siblings were my best friends, so it was just kind of like then going to school and having to like make friends with other people and stuff. I found that really difficult, and I think that I learned quite quickly on in primary school that the whole school experience was going to be much easier if I could learn how to make friends and I could, you know, I wouldn't have to sit on my own. And, you know, it was more challenging to kind of feel lonely every day. So I kind of learned early on that I had to make friends. And I feel like once I learned how to make friends and like, you know, had a group of friends or whatever, I think that that's when I really started to learn how to like mirror their behaviors and mask my own kind of anxieties and all of those things. And I was big, like as I can remember, for like as long as I can remember, I've always written, so I've always like kept a journal and stuff. So those types of things that I kind of held in school, I would come home and like I'd be like, this is my journal, like writing, you know, all of the things that I felt or like my experience. And that definitely helped me to, you know, to express some of that when I couldn't necessarily express it to my friends or whatever. So, and then when I went to high school, I think that again, I just learned how to like fit in, mirror people's behaviors. I kind of could spot patterns, so I could spot like, oh, that popular girl dresses this certain way, or that popular girl, you know, does this or says this. And so I was able to kind of, yeah, like again, I didn't know that this is what I was doing at the time, but now that I've learned about ADHD and stuff, I've learned that mirroring is like a really big thing of trying to fit in and like, you know, spotting patterns and all of those things. So yeah, I just kind of learned how to fit in. I was very academic. I loved school. Like I really loved learning, but I think for me, I loved the more creative side of things. I loved English and history because it meant that I could write essays and I could just kind of flex that writing muscle. And then something interesting when I had my assessment, I didn't realize this was an autistic thing, but the psychiatrist said that the subjects that I really struggled with were the things like science and maths, very like logical type of stuff. And I said to him, but you know, I still did really well in those things because I would memorize the answers to questions, and then in the exam I would like be able to pull it up almost like a photographic memory. I would like just pull up the information and then like answer the question. And I was like, but you know, I kind of felt like that's what everyone did. I felt like everyone could do that. And he was like, no, that's an autistic trait. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So yeah, so that was kind of my experience of school. Is I had lots of friends eventually and I learned how to fit in, but definitely didn't feel like myself and didn't feel like I even really knew who I was because I was so interested in just kind of fitting in and being like everyone else.
Yeah. Wow. What a journey as well.
Yeah.
Is it I was a bit thrown because the memory dragging up thing, like, and then you're like, oh, isn't that what everyone does? I'm sitting here, I'm like, yeah, but like that's what I do. Like if I have to remember something, I'm like, I like if there's certain information, it's like there's certain things like maths and like sciencey stuff for me as well that like my brain will come across stuff and it will be like, no.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're just not, we're not going to do this. We're not going to understand this. It's not
like
going to go in.
Literally like a guard goes up or like a mental block.
Yeah. It's just a flat out, like, that's not happening. But then, like, as you said, like, you find workarounds. I'll, like, memorize this answer. So, you know, you can, like, copy and paste it. But you're not writing it, if you know what I mean.
Or I wouldn't, like if somebody asked me to kind of elaborate on it, I would be like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't know what that actually, I don't understand it, but like I can recite it.
Yeah.
So that's, but like I did, you know, really well in school for that reason. I think that I was, I loved the creative side and I was really interested in it. So I'd do 100%, like, you know, really gave it my all. And then, the other stuff I just kind of was like, learn to get by type of thing.
Yeah. I had to study I studied philosophy at uni, and there was
Oh
a
yeah.
subject called logic, and
Okay.
you had to learn it through a textbook, and it was like equations of like breaking the argument down into like this and this, and then there was like,
Oh wow.
I don't know, those little men that look like Pac-Mans, and then they're like, oh, this
Yeah.
way's like greater than this
Yeah.
way. And I
Yeah.
had like that subject like nearly broke me as a human, and I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah. I can
I
imagine.
just kept like failing all the weekly quizzes, and I had the end of term coming up, and I spent like weeks because I had to decide like, all right, am I going to quit and like throw the towel in and
Yeah.
like probably would have quit uni and whatever, or am I going to like
Mm.
knuckle down and like, am I going to do this? And I spent like every weekend in
Yeah.
the library like studying and crying,
Yeah.
but I passed it in
Yeah.
the end. But my brain did not enjoy that. It's like trying to
No.
squeeze like a square peg through a round hole and like get your brain to
Yeah.
like understand it.
Yeah. But that's another thing that I've learned about ADHD is that we have interest-driven brains. So if you are not interested and engaged in something, then that's where that mental block comes in because you are just, your brain is literally like, nope, we're not interested, like we're not going to engage with it. So a lot of those kinds of stuff that we're not interested in, like logical type of stuff, yeah, you will get that kind of mental block of just like, I do not want to engage.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I don't mean to
Mm.
like when I share, you know, for me, I don't want to come and be like, oh, I'm a neurotypical person and I experienced that. If I'm honest, like I don't know what's going on with me. I'm like I'm sort of in a similar space to you, like
Yeah.
just vibing with
Yeah.
everything on the internet, particularly around the autism stuff,
Yeah.
and sort of just having my son go through these assessments, and you know they say it's very
Yeah.
genetic, and I read everything and I'm like, holy shit, and I just, you know, really resonate
Yeah.
with it all myself. So
I think it's hard
I don't
because
know
I
what's
think
going
like what
on.
you've said, yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of crossovers, and I think that's why I'd kind of not considered autism before because I thought it was very kind of separate, like, you know, separate type of experiences. But when I spoke to the psychiatrist, he was explaining that there's actually like a lot of crossovers. So a lot of the things that I experienced that I thought was ADHD
Yeah.
is not necessarily ADHD specific, and it's very, you know, there's blurred lines between autism and ADHD. And I'm sure bipolar, I've had people comment on my Instagram before saying, oh, I have bipolar, but I also experience this. And it's like, okay, well, that
Yeah.
might be that you have bipolar plus ADHD, or it might just be that, again, like that's part of your
Yeah.
bipolar experience and the way that you experience. Because even
Yeah.
me and like somebody else who has ADHD, we're still going to experience things very differently, um, based on lifestyle, based on, you know, things that we're interested in, all of those things. I think that, you know, two neurodivergent people are still going to be very, very different in that respect.
Mm. Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover.
There was a diagram, I think it's called like a Venn diagram, that I saw recently
Yeah,
that
yeah,
had like bipolar and ADHD, and then like a crossover symptoms in the middle. And that was
yeah,
really
it makes
interesting
sense.
for me because things
Yeah.
that had me questioning, like, am I ADHD, like hyper
Mm,
focus, because I experienced that, like
mm,
having special interests, that sort of stuff, like stimming,
yeah,
where like sleep issues, like a lot of these things have like crossovers behaviors. So
yeah,
that was really useful because then you could sort of see
mm,
like, oh, okay, maybe I'm like, I could just be bipolar, but then also experiencing these crossovers where I didn't feel like I
yeah.
identified as much with like the ADHD ones that weren't in the crossover pool. So things
Okay.
like that I felt like are really useful. And I'm just all for
Yeah, so
social media
interesting.
and people's lived experience, like hearing about your journey and what
Mm,
you experience. It's so, I think, validating and like educational for so many people. I mean, you can
mm,
read essays and speak to doctors and stuff, but tell me actually from a neurodivergent person's brain, what do you actually
yeah.
experience? And it just
I
seems
think
to make
that's the
so much more
thing, and I think
sense.
yeah, and I think like looking back on my self-development journey, like I read so many self-help books and like spirituality books, and there would be I'd be like so kind of interested in it and again like hyper focused on it, and kind of almost obsessive about, you know, changing my life and like becoming a better person.
Yeah.
And now when I look back at a lot of those things, I would like read the book and then try and implement a lot of the tips and stuff, and they just would not work, or I'd be hyper focused and obsessed with them for like 2 weeks and then it just fall off. And I
Yeah.
think what we need to realize is that actually a lot of those books are probably written with neurotypical people in mind. They're probably written by neurotypical people, and it might not be coming from a place of understanding your lived experience as somebody who's neurodivergent. And I think that that's why we really need to practice that kind of discernment and really go on your own journey. I have not read a self-help book now for a really long time because I just feel like understanding and being present in my own journey and going through that and really just being engaged with my own emotions and the things that I feel and the wisdom that it comes with that, because emotions are so important. I talk about this a lot, but you know, we have emotions for a reason. And I think when you are neurodivergent, you are deeply, deeply emotional. Those emotions are here to bring messages. They're not here to kind of attack you or like ruin your life. They're here to bring those messages of, okay, you're really anxious right now, which means that you are projecting onto the future, or, you know, worrying too much about the past and you're not in the present moment. And it's really just like a little alarm bell to be like, okay, do your grounding, do your mindfulness, like get back into the present moment. And there's so much clarity and wisdom that comes when we're engaged with those emotions and we allow ourselves to actually just feel them and listen for those messages and kind of come out the other side. Like I always get these big realizations about, you know, myself and life and the big questions of life when I just allow myself to be present with those emotions and go through that process and come out the other end. And I think that that's really something that self-help books can't teach you, because you are going to experience emotions and life in, you know, very different ways depending on who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like through your self-help journey and the sort of tools and techniques you've learnt in that, have you picked up stuff that sort of helps you, I guess, safely delve into and process and sit with those emotions? Because I know for me, like, sometimes when I was younger, for instance, sitting with emotions was really difficult and they would overwhelm me, and it just didn't feel safe because I didn't know how to navigate that emotional landscape.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you would recommend to sort of, I guess, start that process of learning how to sit with and feel and listen to your emotions without getting to the point where that it's just too overwhelming and you can't actually cope with them?
Yeah, so I really love any type of like nervous system regulation tools, like somatic exercises. So anything that is going to help. So like therapy and talking about the way that you feel and what you experience, even journaling about your feelings, is really great to kind of process it and get that out there. But I think a lot of the time what that can do is that it can lead to us intellectualizing our feelings and thinking too much. And if there's anything that we don't need to do more, it's thinking, as people with ADHD, because we do that all the time. And I think we really need to get out of our minds of like, what does this mean? You know, what does this mean about me? And like really questioning our emotions. And instead, anything that is going to help you to drop into the body is going to be an emotional regulation tool. So going for a walk in nature, doing any type of like jumping or shaking, exercise, breath work, anything where you can kind of change that physiology and calm down your nervous system is going to massively help you to move through those emotions in a really safe way and to just allow yourself space to actually feel them, even if they will feel that real like intense feeling, like they'll peak if you are kind of sat with it and, you know, moving it through the body and all of those things. I think that it gets to that peak where you're like, oh my goodness, this is so uncomfortable. And that's when at that peak people will want to pick up their phone or, you know, grab something comforting to eat or, you know, distract themselves in some way. But if you are able to just breathe through it, move your body through it, even just some like light sways, like I said, going for a walk, moving your body in any type of way and moving that energy through the body, because all emotions are like this energy, like it's an energetic force that is coming through your body and bringing that message, and anything that you can do to move it through that body is going to be hugely beneficial. and just staying with it. Like it's really uncomfortable sometimes, but just keep moving your body, keep like being really soft and gentle, allowing it to peak at that intensity, and then you will feel that kind of relief of like, okay, it feels a little bit easier now, like I've moved it through. And that's when normally I will kind of journal on it and reflect on it once it's actually moved through the body and that intensity is lowered, because you don't want to get stuck in that intellectualizing phase. Like you actually do want to feel it for it to be released from the body.
Yeah, I love that. You said that so well. That's awesome.
Oh,
Really,
thank
really
you.
good advice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just massively helped me. It was around that time when I got put on the wait list, that's when I really started to kind of venture into emotional regulation. And it was something that like I was able to help my kids with as well, because they were kind of struggling with their big emotions. They were only toddlers, and so trying to deal with their big emotions with my big emotions, like it was just a lot. So we started doing emotional regulation techniques together, which really helped. And I really like to help them to like witness me and my emotions, and I'm very honest about the way that I feel with them, because I don't think there should be any shame around them. I don't want them to feel any shame around it. So giving them those coping mechanisms and seeing me be an example of that, okay, mummy feels a little bit angry, she's gonna, go and scream into a pillow.
Yeah.
That's kind of the things that I want to normalize in our house. It's very important to me that they see me feel angry and know that it's okay and it's nothing to be shameful about, but I'm gonna deal with it in a really healthy way.
Yeah. That's something so beautiful, I think, that you're doing is just, yeah, that honesty with your children. Because I try and do this with my kids as well. And I can't always hold back my emotions if I'm overwhelmed,
of course,
or if
yeah,
I'm angry,
yeah.
but it's important to say to them, like, I think it's good as well. They can see you experiencing that emotion. It also validates their own experience to
Yeah,
know that, like,
exactly, yeah.
oh, but I get angry sometimes. Like, am I wrong? Am I bad? They're like, no, mum gets angry too. Oh, this is what she does when she's
It's
angry.
normal.
She shakes around, or
Yeah,
I sometimes have to like I
yeah,
put in music in my earphones, and I'll like sing for a while, and
yeah,
my daughter
music's
will be
great.
like, stop singing, and I'll be like, mummy needs to sing because
Yeah,
I'm feeling overwhelmed and this helps me feel better. And
yeah,
my son gets it, and he actually
yeah,
said to me once, he was like, he could see me getting a bit overwhelmed because my daughter was just like yapping away, and I was like, oh my god. And he was like,
yeah.
do you need to put your earphones in, mum?
Oh, and I think it's moments like that, then you think, like I said, we question ourselves every day as parents, whether we're
Yeah.
doing the right thing, whether anything we say is rubbing off on them. And then you have a moment like that and you're like, oh, okay, like they're listening to me. They're actually, I feel like I'm doing something right by them and by the family and stuff. So it's really lovely when you have those moments that you're like, I'm so glad that during those really difficult times, I've put that work in to, like you said, not perfect at all. I definitely, still have moments where I lose it or I don't act in a way that I want to act. But I think, again, that's also like completely normal. I say to my kids all the time, everyone makes mistakes. That's okay. We just kind of, we help rectify them, we help clean them up. And so when I do make those mistakes of like losing it or snapping or whatever, I will always make sure afterwards to be like, I'm really sorry, like mummy feels angry and that's completely okay, but it was not okay for me to shout at you. I'm really sorry. And kind of just, again, yeah, just letting them see that we all make mistakes, but you just have to kind of work through that and like rectify it afterwards type of thing.
Yeah, that's great. I
Yeah.
do that too. I think it lets them know, like, it sets them up for what they're willing to experience, I guess, later in life. For like, oh,
Yeah.
it's okay if my partner shouts at me because mum used to shout at me. It's like, no, if I've
Yeah.
shouted at you, like I always
Yeah.
make a point to go and say sorry and say that wasn't okay. And then, make
Yeah.
sure that they feel like that I've apologized, sort of feel that. So I think that's really
Yeah.
important. I don't know if other generations did this, but I hear this a lot of something that our generation is starting to do, and like, go us, go millennials.
Yeah. I think I don't know a lot of people who grew up with parents who taught this type of thing. I think it was definitely a culture and a generational thing. And, for that, I have like a lot of compassion for my parents. They had 7 children, which must have been incredibly stressful. And I, really do understand how that must have been. I think if they didn't have those coping mechanisms that we've now been taught or taught ourselves through social media and the information that's out there and stuff, you know, it must have been incredibly hard. And I think you only know what you know, and you can only deal with, you know, what you know at the time. And I think that it's very important to have compassion for those people that didn't necessarily, you know, behave in the best way. And I think when you're neurodivergent as well, you really do get very good at energy reading and like reading other people's emotions, and you know, maybe you taking those on as your own and thinking, oh, you know, if they're angry, it means that they're angry at me. And that's another thing that I kind of make a point to say to my kids is like, I'm not angry at you, I'm just angry and I'm just not feeling great today. And I think making it known that it's not about you, this is my body that I'm experiencing, and all of those things, and just making it clear that it's not about them.
You're doing amazing. That's so good.
Oh, thank you. We just try our best, don't we? Honestly, there are some days when I'm just kind of like, what is going on and what am I supposed to do about this situation? I have no clue. It's funny when people kind of message me on Instagram and ask me for parenting advice, and I'm just kind of like, no clue, don't ask me, wouldn't know. Like, I just really do take it day by day, because like I said, with my own challenges with ADHD and then having to kind of parent and have those expectations and then try and deal with their challenges and their emotions and help them navigate it, it's just so much. And I think it changes on a daily basis, and I do really wake up every day and say, okay, like, what does today need from me? I really try not to kind of plan too much ahead or set goals too much ahead, because I'm just kind of like, it could all change tomorrow. You know, your kid gets sick and they're off daycare and all of those things, and I just think it's so changeable and you have to adapt. And yeah, I just take it day by day and just be like, what do I need today? What do my kids need today? Let's just get through today and be as present and as peaceful as possible.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're on the right track.
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious, because I think I hear a lot of people say like, well, you know, you've made it to your 30s, like you're grown up now, like why bother pursuing a diagnosis?
Yeah.
How has getting that diagnosis changed life for you? Has it made a difference?
I think that, like I said, I had already been putting things in place for 18 months up until the fact, like, my diagnosis. So I feel like it didn't help in that sense. I was offered medication when I got my diagnosis, and I went on it for 2 months, just because I was kind of like, again, you don't know what you don't know. I've never been on this medication before. The psychiatrist was like, this could be completely life-changing for you. And when someone says something is life-changing, you are kind of like, okay. So I did go on it for 2 months, and I didn't have any negative side effects. I fully support anybody who, if I'd have been offered medication, I think at the time of me going for the referral, like when I was really, really in the thick of it, it would have massively helped me. I think I would have accepted it. I would have, you know, really been grateful. I think it would have got me out of that kind of dark place. But because I'd put things in place for 18 months, I was in generally a good place. I was managing my ADHD really well in a holistic manner, that after 2 months, I was kind of just a bit like, I didn't feel like they made a massive difference. And so I would rather look into more holistic options and kind of do what I've been doing. So in that respect, I do. And in all fairness, I think something that probably does need to change is that once I kind of told the psychiatrist that I didn't want medication, he was just a little bit like, you know, you really should, like, was really trying to push it on me. And I was like, no, like, this is my decision, whatever. And nothing else was really explored or like suggested. He wasn't like, okay, well, you know, if you don't want to go on medication, how about therapy, or how about that? Like, there was nothing else offered. And so I literally got a letter in the post the other day to say, like, you've been discharged because you don't need our services. And I was like, well, you know, maybe if there was something more holistic, I would want your services, but there's not, so whatever. So I think from that respect, it didn't massively change anything because I'd been changing things. But the validation, like it was such a sigh of relief. I think it was just, yeah, I think I understand myself so much more now. I give myself so much more grace. I'm a lot kinder to myself because I understand how my brain works now. I am able to put accommodations in place in my environment, in my workplace that support that. And, you know, previous to my diagnosis, I just felt like I was doing life wrong and like I didn't, everyone else was kind of very capable and knew what they were doing. And I was just like, why is everyone else juggling all these things and knows what they're doing and I have no clue what's going on? And I think, yeah, it's just, I think that my confidence has definitely grown since getting that validation because I am like, oh, this is just who I am. I am different, but I am different in a great way. And there are things that are, you know, so lovely about, you know, this thing that is ADHD. And I personally, you know, have a lot of benefits and positives, and I like to see the positives in things anyway. I know that there are a lot of people out there that say, you know, there are people kind of romanticizing neurodiversity or will only talk about the positives. You know, I'm just that type of person. If I am being handed something, like I can't change the fact that I've got ADHD. Like I can't change this thing that has been given to me. I have to believe that I am this way for a reason and this is just part of my life journey. And yes, there are days when I feel like it's a challenge and I'm like why is my brain like this? But also, you know, I think that you have just got to make the best of what you've got, and you've got to kind of, if you want to live a healthy, happy, balanced life, you really do have to try and make the best of it. And I just try and see the positive in the situation. So for me, yeah, it definitely means a lot more grace and kindness, which is helpful for a lot of things, I think.
It's such a good mindset to have and such a good perspective. And I think that's so helpful for a lot of people because, yeah, I mean, people do put out their content about the, you know, the hard parts and all of that. And yeah, that's really relevant as well, not to dismiss any of that. But I probably try and see things through the same lens as well, in more that sort of neurodiversity affirming approach where there's, you know, there are strengths to this, there's positives to this. Let's focus on what those are and look how do we utilize those. It's, you know, it really just all comes down to living the best quality of life that you can, right?
Yeah, I think it's just a more empowering message. I think two truths can exist. It doesn't have to be ADHD is amazing or ADHD is terrible. It can be like both of those things are true at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And you are going to experience, you know, one mindset one day and the next day might be, you know, something completely different. But I think, like you said, if you want a good quality of life, you want to be healthy and happy, you really do have to try and find the empowerment in that and try and find the positives and really just embrace your differences and say, you know, yes, I have these things, but it's not going to hold me back. Like I have this vision for my life. And after my diagnosis, you know, things were like, oh, am I going to be able to do that thing now? And like, am I going to be able to do that? And, you know, of course I'm going to be able to do all of those things, but the way in which I do it now is probably going to be very different. You know, it's going to be, I'm going to need a lot more accommodations in place to be able to do that thing. But I'm not going to give up on my dreams and my goals because I now have this thing that makes that challenging. I think we only have one life and you've just got to make the best of it, you know?
Yeah. 100%. It's a really good mindset. I had the same thing like when I got a bipolar diagnosis, and then I feel like I had this moment where I had to decide, like, is this it? Like, is this label, this term bigger than me now? And that now I have to accept X quality of life that I'm going to live because I have this, you know, this diagnosis now. Or do I say, okay, well, I still have this vision for my life that I want to accomplish. If I have to work twice as hard to get it because I have to manage my lifestyle and my emotions and my moods and everything, and then still do the work that, you know, takes to get that lifestyle or, you know, make those dreams happen. That turning point or that decision where you're like, okay, well, which is it going to be?
I think we all have that choice.
I think people could take away from that Look, I've loved this conversation. Before we finish up, I noticed on your page you talk a little bit about being a writer and that you're
Yeah.
working on something at the moment. Did you want to share anything
Yes.
about what's happening there?
Yeah, so exciting. So I have always wanted to be a writer, and that is like my big dream and like my big
Yeah.
vision. And I have written and I've kept every single journal that I've ever had, and I've got like piles and piles of journals everywhere. I have like journal entries from when I was 8. Like it is just
Yeah.
writing for me has always been my way of kind of processing the way that I feel, processing what's going on around me. Like it just really helps me to make sense. Like I don't really know how I feel about something until I've written it down. And so it's just been like my best friend throughout life is to be able to write and create. And that's
Mm.
basically why I started my Instagram page. I was doing like motherhood blogging because I just needed somewhere to like put my thoughts and feelings, and then I really didn't think anything of it. But then when people started kind of following and like messaging me to say, oh, like this is so validating, this is how I feel too, I was like, oh, this is really nice that I'm able to express how I feel, and there's people out there that feel the same, and we can have that connection. So that's kind of why that started. So I've kind of always written, every single day. Like I said, I share on Instagram my writing quite a bit, and I've got a blog and stuff. But yeah, I got an idea for a novel a couple of months ago now, like very randomly, and I'm very excited about it. It's got an ADHD main character because I personally feel like since having ADHD, I've realized I'm an avid reader. Like I read like one book a
Mm.
week. I love it, love it. Um, there's not a lot of kinds of books that I read with neurodivergent main characters or, conversations around that. So I would really love to kind of be able to write books that represent, that community and kind of share my own experience. Again, I feel like writing a novel for me is me processing my own journey just in a way that is more like, somebody else's story. I think it's sometimes easier to process your own feelings and journeys when it's through the lens of somebody else. So yeah, it's going to be a little small town romance with a female ADHD character. So I'm really excited. I'm working on that. But that's my big vision for life, is to just write books and just, yeah, and hopefully help my community in the meantime as well.
That's so cool. I
Thank
definitely want to
you.
read that. I think there's such a big, not a, like a need. There's a big
Yeah,
need for more neurodivergent voices to be
yeah,
published, to be represented, and the
yeah,
more neurodivergent people take up that mantle and put that voice, put those words out there, I think it'll get eaten up. I think there's a real need for it in
yeah, I
society, in
hope
the
so.
community. Um,
Yeah,
so I love that you're doing that. I definitely want to
thank
read
you.
more books, about lived experience with ADHD, with autism.
Yeah.
I actually wrote my own book recently about bipolar.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very, very,
amazing.
very similar thing. We have so many synergies. It's crazy.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's about a young woman sort of coming of age in Newcastle, Australia, and navigating like dating, career, family dynamics,
oh,
while
amazing.
she actually has a drug addiction because it's a coping mechanism,
Yeah,
and living with undiagnosed bipolar. And it's dual perspectives through someone that she
yeah,
starts to date, but through that dating experience, she really starts to spiral. And it all becomes, quite turbulent, and
yeah.
leads to like a catalyst moment where she actually gets help and gets a diagnosis. But I think sort of
Wow, that's
similar,
amazing.
yeah, thank you. And
Yeah.
like similar
No,
to
it's
you, it's
honestly like
just,
writing a book is just, I think it's like the most challenging but rewarding thing that you can do. So anyone who writes anything, I'm just like, you are amazing. Well done. Like I think that not enough people get a pat on the back for that. It's so vulnerable as well. I think putting
yeah.
your writing out there is like the most vulnerable thing, especially if it's something that you've wanted to do like since you were a child. So yeah, I really commend you on that. That's incredible.
Yeah, cheers. It's similar to you in a way. Like
Yeah.
the goal is like if a young girl, if a young woman can read that and go, oh wow, like I feel like that, or I identify with that,
Yeah.
and it helps her like go and get help, and, you know, come to a diagnosis a lot quicker, like the amount of pain and years of struggle and everything that could save, I think would, you know, that is really the difference that I'd love to make, is just sort of help people feel that sense of like camaraderie, feel seen, feel not alone, and also like prompt them to get help and seek help if that's something that they need and identify with. Also, it's fun and it's very entertaining, so very good.
We love a little bit of humour, light humour.
Love a bit of humour, love a bit of romance.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, good. Well, I can't wait to follow along on that journey. And I was thinking as well, when you were talking before, if you ever want to write something about holistic living with neurodivergence, that's, you know, you have such great insight into all of that. I would definitely read like a playbook or like a guidebook by Sophie on how to, you know, holistically live with ADHD. I think that could be a real strength
so
for
I
you as
do
well.
actually have I have like I call it like a glow up guide. So I did like a mini course recently where I just put everything that I've learned about managing ADHD naturally into like really digestible bite-sized lessons. It's got like daily planners that you can print off that are ADHD friendly. It's got like recipes and nutrition lists and things like that, because like I want to, going forward, I am going to be concentrating on my writing, but I definitely wanted to share something so that they, you know, my community, when they do join along, can have like everything that I've learned in one place, and it's really affordable. So I just wanted to have that there for them to be able to access. So that is available on my Instagram as well.
That's so amazing. Awesome. Anyone listening, if you want to check that out, they can find it on your Instagram page on the link.
It'll be on my Instagram in the link in bio.
Oh, I'm going to check that out. That's amazing. Cool. All right, Sophie, so lovely having you here today. I've loved this chat. Thanks so much for coming on, and sorry if I spoke about myself a lot today. I just get really excited when you say a lot of things that, like, I'm just in the same sort of season of life and just resonate with a lot of what you said. And I think that's a neurodivergent thing, when you want to like bond and relate to someone. You're like,
I love that. I always do that. That's another thing that I didn't realize was a neurodivergent thing, when somebody shares a story and you're like, oh my God, yeah, me too. And then you share your story. I think that's like our love language, like from one neurodivergent to another, like we get it and we're like, yeah. But I didn't realize that neurotypicals kind of sometimes are a bit like, I'm talking about myself, why? And I'm just like, no, like I'm excited for you, and I'm like trying to show that, but not a lot of people get that, but I love it, so share away.
Okay, great, because I love it too. It's just coming from a place of like, that's really exciting, like I love that.
Connection.
It's like, I want to show you that I understand what you're saying by sharing this like similar lived experience, so that you can see like the synergies between it, and then you tell me the next story, and then I'll tell you the next story. This is like, this is my preferred way to communicate. It weirds me out that people like don't do this, you know what I mean?
I thought this was us just having a conversation, and like this is how we connect with people. I don't understand how other people do it, but I love it. I love hearing people's stories, and I think that's why I really love having my Instagram community so much as well, because people message me all the time at like the loveliest things, and like sharing their stories, and it's hugely validating, I think, when you can share those experiences with each other. You just feel a lot less alone. So
100%. Well,
thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice.
It's been great having you. Thanks for sharing your story with everyone today. And I encourage everyone to go and check out the Sophie Hale at Instagram. You can check out her glow up guide, follow along on her writing journey, and take in her really holistic and uplifting messages as well.
Thank you.
All right. Enjoying the Neuro Diaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favourite podcast listening app. Visit our Instagram at the Neuro Diaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.